Okay, good morning, everybody. Appreciate you coming and listening to me today. Today I'm going to give you, kind of like Mark, we're going to give you an overview on Bengal dayflower tropical spiderwort. I did my first test on tropical spiderwort or Bengal dayflower back in 2001, so over 20 plus years ago, and we continue to have problems, and so I thought it would be a good time to maybe review what we know. Also, as you can tell from the color of my hair, I'm getting older and I'm getting forgetful, so I wanted to write some stuff down before I get to the point maybe where I don't remember what I told you yesterday. So if you'll bear with me. All right, so before I go any further, I need to make sure we're on the same page. Sometimes you hear me say tropical spiderwort, sometimes you hear me say Bengal dayflower. Technically, from a weed science standpoint, the name of the plant is Bengal dayflower. When we first started working with the plant, we didn't really know what it was. We're calling it tropical spiderwort. That's what it was known as. But then, as time evolved, we started calling it Bengal dayflower, and that's because of this plant. This is actually spiderwort. If you drive around Georgia in the spring, you're going to see this plant all over the place, around your mailbox, the sides of the roads and ditches. This is actually spiderwort, right? So, but again, if you hear me say tropical spiderwort, Bengal dayflower, it's the same thing. Just because we've been working with it so long, sometimes it's hard to just say Bengal dayflower. Okay? Now, just a few things about Bengal dayflower, just so we're all on the same page. I think the more you know about a pest, as Mark showed you, the better you're going to be able to control it. It is a noxious and invasive weed. It's not native to the U.S. Its origin is in Asia and Africa. Right? In our climate, it's an annual weed, but in tropical environments, it would be a perennial. It produces by seeds and rhizomes. It has above and below ground flowers, which make it a unique species in terms of the dayflowers that are out there. And you may not have heard this term before. It's considered to be a monsoon weed. I never heard that. If you never heard that word before, it's a weed that, as I got listed here, you'll get a faster completion of its life cycle when the soil moisture is plentiful, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And it can produce anywhere from 8,000 to 12,000 seed per plant. Not as prolific a seed producer as Palmer amaranth, but still that's a lot of seed. And remember this, because this is critical to management, is that it can go from seed to seed in as little as 42 days. And I'm going to bring that, why is that important? I'll tell you in a minute when we get down to the control strategies. All right, I did mention it was a monsoon weed, and I just wanted to remind you, if you look at the past 5 years in Georgia, and I've got Cairo here in Midfield to kind of give you two different parts of the state. In the last 4 of the 5 years, we had excessive rainfall. So that would contribute to tropical spiderwort or Bengal dayflower being a problem. What also happens when you get a lot of rainfall in a year? Our residual herbicides don't last as long. They're either going to run off or leach, and they won't be around when we need them for tropical spiderwort or Bengal dayflower. Now, just to show you a couple of pictures for you younger folks out here who weren't around, or maybe you were babies when it was 2000 and so, this is some of the earlier work that was done. My colleague and I have done a lot of work over the years on this particular weed. This was a problem. This was our main problem before Palmer amaranth became such a serious issue. But here's some Bengal dayflower and cotton. Obviously, totally undesirable there. Here's some in peanut. This is, again, that's just showing you some of our research plots that we had. That was in most of the research that I've done was done in Grady County and Berrien County and Tattnall County. And for whatever reason, those were areas where there were hot spots where we can get a lot of good data. All right, and here's some in corn. In corn, it's an interesting pest. It doesn't emerge till later in the year. So when we plant corn early in the spring, most of that stuff doesn't come up until June. And so our control programs in the crop of corn, which I'll talk about a little more, aren't really effective. All right, so this weed is emerging later, and that's a problem that we have in corn. And then this is where I think our biggest hole is. This is a field of corn in Grady County after the corn was harvested. That's a complete cover of tropical spiderwort or Bengal dayflower. I guess I go back and forth. And just think about how much seed, if we don't manage that weed in the fall, remember I told you it can produce seed in 42 days, right? How much seed is getting produced in that field that's going to be a problem in whatever crops get rotated over the next several years. And I do want to point out, this is Dr. Ted Webster. You may not have known him. He was one of our USDA weed scientists who passed away a few years ago. He was extremely critical in our early work on tropical spiderwort of Bengal dayflower. He really did a lot of the biology type work that myself and Dr. Culpepper wouldn't do. He was a different kind of scientist than we are. So I wanted to acknowledge him, and it was a hard loss that our weed science team took when he passed away unexpectedly. Now, just a few things. Again, there's a lot of people out here that consult as well. There are a lot of lookalikes in Georgia. There are at least 9 species in the Commelinaceae plant family that look an awful lot alike. And then you have 2 different genuses, the Commelina species and then the Merdania species. You know, dayflowers and doveweeds is how I would break them out. But you can see we've got 6 different kinds of dayflower. They all look alike. And then 3 different kinds of doveweed, and they sort of look alike too. So just because you have a dayflower in the field doesn't automatically mean it's going to be Bengal dayflower or tropical spiderwort. And so we got to understand how to identify it, which I'll show you in a minute. And here's just some pictures. You can see this is the Commelina. These are the 6 species of dayflower that we have in Georgia. And let me go back one. I do want to acknowledge Dr. Richard Carter, who's a botanist out of Valdosta State University. He was extremely helpful in us with working with us to get the plant properly identified and doing some subsequent work on some of the biology. And he's been an excellent resource for me being a botanist. All right, so again, here's the pictures. You can see they look a lot alike. They have similar flower colors. You know, they can be difficult to identify, and we'll talk about the things that make Bengal dayflower or tropical spiderwort unique. And then here are the Merdania or the doveweeds. You can see if you walk into a field that you can maybe be confused on what's there. Am I an expert on identifying all these? I am not, right? There's a lot of things. You can't really distinguish between the dayflowers and the doveweeds until they get a flower. So that can be a little bit difficult sometimes. Fortunately, I think what we're seeing, or in the work that we've done, a lot of the weeds, the species respond similarly, so we haven't seen a big issue with control. All right. Now, here's the 2 things that separate Bengal dayflower from the other species that we have. Number 1 is the width, the size of the leaves. They tend to be shorter and fat. Right, so the leaf to width ratio, length to width ratio is 3 to 1. If it's bigger than that, it's not going to be the Bengal dayflower. And more importantly, these are the underground flowers that you see with Bengal dayflower. So again, remember, it produces above and below ground flowers. And if you pull up a plant, then it has these. This is the only dayflower that has those underground flowers. So it's pretty obvious if you're dealing with the Bengal dayflower or tropical spiderwort problem. Okay. Now, Mark mentioned a few fun facts. I would like to give you a few fun facts. They're not fun because they're bad, right? And if you didn't know it, tropical spiderwort is a host for nematodes, right? So that's not good. Especially think about that cornfield I showed you. If you have nematodes in that field, what is that doing to your population of nematodes? It's also a host for southern stem rot or white mold. That's not a good thing, right? The seed is spread by doves and other birds, right? So it's hard to keep it confined to a field, right? But so you dove hunters keep going because that's, the more doves we can control, the better spiderwort control we'll get. It does have some value as a forage. I don't know if he's here today. One of the growers that I was working with has a lot of cows, and he told me they like to graze it. And so he asked me if it had any value as a forage crop. And it does. I actually did a test. I see Dr. Baldwin there. John, you know more about the value of forages than I do, but I compared it to Bermuda grass, perennial peanut, and here's tropical spiderwort. It doesn't have as much protein and not a high quality as some other things. But the bad thing about trying to think about grazing it is that it can reproduce vegetatively. So if it goes through a cow and you're moving it all around your farm, you could be spreading cuttings that are able to survive that digestion process, and that would spread it more. But it does have, you probably would never feed it to a dairy cow, but John, but maybe your cows would do okay. But I'm not recommending that we use it as a forage because I think that's a way we're going to spread it. All right. Now, I want to talk about some important research that we've done, and I also want to acknowledge, I don't know if Tim is here. Tim Flanders was our retired Grady County and Berry County agent. He was extremely involved in all this research because that Grady County, Berrien County area was sort of the epicenter for spider wort back in the early days. So I want to talk about, weed scientists always get accused of just talking about herbicides, but there are other things that can be done to help manage this particular weed: planting date, twin rows, tillage, burial depth. All these things have an influence on spider wort. And I'm going to show you some data. I typically don't like to show data to grower. That's for scientists to look at and for us to tell you what's going on. But I think it'll help drive home some of the if you hear me talk about tillage or you hear me talk about burial depth or planting date, those things don't come out of the air. We don't make recommendations until we have a significant amount of research to back up what we think is going to be working. All right? So the first thing I want to show you is planting date. These are two different planting dates, and this just came out, Barry, this is from the University of Florida. This just came out in 2024, so it's some brand new data. Here's a May planting date, and here's a June planting date, and this is the number of spiderwort or dayflower plants in the untreated checks, right? So you can see that just by delaying a planting, you had a significantly more amount of spiderwort that you had to deal with. Right? Why is that? It's a later emerging plant. Remember I told you 60% of that plant, the population, doesn't come up until after June, right? So planting earlier would be one way to help get around that particular problem. And the later you plant, the more likely you are to have these problems, okay? Now let's talk about twin rows. Again, this is some work that was done in Florida as well. We had a twin row and a single row here. You can see we got about a 12% increase in spiderwort control, or again, I keep saying spiderwort, remember Bengal dayflower, 12% increase in control with a single and a twin. And then this is the effect of burial depth on emergence. So let me explain this graph to you, right? Here's burial depth, so the seed are buried at these depths, and then this is the emergence, right? So if you bury, basically what this tells you is that if I bury that seed somewhere between 4 and 5 inches, it does not have enough power to come up, right? So that's why tillage, when you hear me talk about tillage, that's why tillage works, because you're burying the seed and it doesn't have the ability to come up. And there's other things going on as well. And then here's just some more, this is some pictures again. Here's conventional tillage, strip till. You get way more population in a strip till than a conventional. Here's some more data, conventional, paratill, strip till. Where we're not turning that land, we tend to see more problems. Now, here's another interesting piece of data. If you ever think about, are we ever going to be able to get rid of this problem, right? What this data shows you, again, this is the time of burial, right? It was buried 8 inches deep, right? And then this is the emergence. So after about 3 years of being buried, you don't get any more emergence. Right? So that's a good thing. Now, we can't keep birds from coming in the field, right? We can't keep tractors from moving in the field. But in theory, if you could keep the seed from being dumped into the field, eventually you could get back to maybe a more manageable level of this particular pest. Remember, when you bury a seed, there's a lot of things going on, right? There's diseases, insects, mammals, all kind of things that affect seed. Okay. Now let's talk about control, right? Because that's the main thing. If you're a grower, you want to hear about is control. All right, and I'll talk about peanuts first. And Scott mentioned this. We know I showed you the data, right? That turning that land is extremely beneficial. Not everybody wants to turn land. I get that, and there are some growers that have been able to manage their dayflower without turning their land, but it's taken a little extra effort in some other crops. Know your planting date is going to have effect if you can plant in twin rows. The group 15 herbicides that I've listed here, that's our backbone of the program. The best way to control Bengal dayflower is to keep it from coming up. How do you keep it from coming up? You use a residual, okay? Paraquat's excellent. Cadre's okay if it's really small and its environment's right, but generally not as good as other things. Strong Arm's very good, and Basagran is becoming more interesting to me as I tested it the last few years. I've elevated it a little bit on my list of herbicides that can be effective. Okay. Now I'll just show you some pictures. This is some work we've done recently in Sumter County with our county agents, just to kind of show you. This was an aerial view. You can see all the plots where there's no Bengal dayflower. In this test, we were really looking at an act cracking type treatment. That was gramoxone and storm, and then one of the group 15 herbicides that I mentioned to you. You can see wherever those are, they're extremely effective in burning down the emerge stand of Bengal dayflower, as well as giving you residual control. And I've got storm here. You can use Basagran, or you can make your own storm as well if you choose to. All right, now here's some work that we did in Berrien County. I think I saw Ben in here. This was actually spreading dayflower. This was not the Bengal dayflower. This is strong arm right on the left. You can see how bad that is. Here's strong arm and dual magnum. Gave excellent control of that particular species. And then here's some, this is broadloom. Broadloom is a generic Basagran. Right, again, you can see our untreated, and then you can see how well that the broadloom did. And I did throw some dual in there with that treatment to give us residual control that would hopefully last a little longer. Okay. All right, let's talk about corn. This is to me, this is the most challenging part. And Scott, is my time okay? I want to make sure I don't go over into Albert's time. Yeah, I think I got a few more minutes, a couple more minutes. This is our most challenging crop to control it in, because it doesn't come up until later in the year, usually after the corn is way too tall to do anything about, right? So, but later planting, we could probably do a little bit better, some double crop corn. So again, having the residuals in there that I mentioned, we can use 2,4-D in crop, but I got some issues with 2,4-D over the top on a non-tolerant variety. We've got to be really careful. We can use Basagran, and we found out that Halix GT, or the active ingredient Callisto, has activity on Bengal dayflower, a little bit better activity than some of the other chemicals in that same family. And then we can go with a lay-by with AIM, EVIC, or gramoxone. But to me, the important thing would be, what are you doing in your corn after your harvest? If you let it go to seed, you shot yourself in the foot, and you got to do something in the fall to manage it. Again, here's some pictures. Here's that Callisto that I mentioned. This is again from Sumter County. You can see that Callisto there did a pretty good job as far as a post-emergence. Now, if you've been around, this will be my 26th year in Georgia, and my colleague and I travel all around the state every year. We do about 40 weed meetings, and we've been trying our whole career to get growers to do more lay-by. And we know why you don't want to use a lay-by, because it takes time and it's slower. But you can clean up a lot of junk with a lay-by, okay? And if you don't believe me, I was talking to Donald Trump last night, and he said, you don't love America if you don't have a lay-by rig, all right? So you better get one, all right? Now, again, I'll just show you, we can control it with a lay-by. Here's gramoxone and dual. That's all coffee weed that's up. All the spartawort was taken care of. And then here's post-harvest. This was done this past year in Grady County. 2 shots of gramoxone, 2 shots of 2,4-D, and you can see we got excellent control of the tropical spiderwort dayflower. Just think how much seed is being dumped back into that field at that location. This year's going to be a nightmare in that field to manage that particular weed. All right. All right, let's talk about beans real quick. Am I still okay? Again, we're really focusing a lot on, again, we call them as weed scientists group 15s, the duals, the outlooks, the warrants, post-emergence, Basagran, classic, first rate, the 2,4-Ds, pursuit. Remember pursuit, some of you older folks like myself. And then, as I mentioned, we can use gramoxone in a lay-by and really clean up a lot of stuff. Here's some Roundup in pursuit. Here's Roundup in classic. Here's Roundup in first rate. So those are all things that can be used. Dicamba is not very good on tropical spiderwort or Bengal dayflower. Plus, we won't have dicamba for 2025 anyway over the top of cotton and soybeans. All right, here's from a grower's field this past year where they used some Basagran. Right here was what it looked like on the day that they sprayed, and here was it a few weeks later. So I've elevated my stance on Basagran because it's been looking pretty good in some of the later research that we've been seeing growers try. All right, what about cotton? My colleague gave me this slide. You know, we can use Warren at planting. And then again, we're putting, you know, sadly, this is putting a lot of pressure on the Group 15s. Right? We've got to use them to manage a lot of our weeds, so hopefully we don't get into a resistance problem with those. Right? Post after it's up, you can do Roundup and Staple or Roundup and 2,4-D. And then here's again the lay-by. We can clean up a bunch of weeds, not only spiderwort, but morning glory and pigweed, if growers would consider doing a lay-by. I know why not many people are doing it, but if you're really struggling, it's a great way to manage a lot of different weeds. Okay. So as I finish up here, just a quick reminder, I tripped in the field. I'm buried under there one year. I tripped in there. That's me under there. It's a monsoon weed. Remember, wet years, it's going to do better than dry years. It's a later merger, so that's why we have problems in corn. It does not like tillage, right? When you bury it, it doesn't last long in the soil and has trouble emerging. It produces lots of seed. Group 15s are important. And remember, in corn, we've got to do something after corn harvest because it produces seed from seed to seed in 42 days. We get our corn off in late July, August. We don't get a hard freeze until the middle of November, maybe later. So you've got ample opportunity in the fall for seed to be produced.